Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my Week 9 wide receiver rankings for the 2025 fantasy football season, going over my top 40 wide receivers. So if you're looking for my thoughts on a specific player, be sure to travel down to the description of the video. I have timestamps available there. While you're down in the description, if you have not yet already, of course, subscribe to the channel, as you'll gain an edge upon your league mates for the remainder of the season, as I'm making daily fantasy football content in order to help you capture a 2025 fantasy football championship. And by subscribing today, you'll help me get one step closer to achieving my goal of 100,000 subscribers this season. Thank you very much. Okay, let's begin the wide receiver conversation by beginning with matchups. Based on receiving statistics allowed thus far this season, from weeks 1 through 8, we find that the Cowboys, Ravens, Colts, Steelers, Lions, Jaguars, etc. are the most advantageous matchups going into the given week. Therefore, we're firing up our wide receivers against these teams. Marvin Harrison Jr., yes, has not looked great thus far this season, and the ups and downs of Kyler Murray missing time has certainly put a strain on many of our teams. But with the Dallas Cowboys matchup on Monday Night Football, we have to start Marvin Harrison. Again, I wanted to present some of these more advantageous matchups so that we continue to influence the idea of having to play Marvin Harrison, Waddle against the Ravens, DK Metcalf against the Colts, Michael Pittman Jr., Alec Pierce, Josh Downs can all be relevant taking on the Steelers. Just wanted to represent some of the more advantageous matchups, as I will be referencing back to it, while also talking about some of the more disadvantageous matchups. Taking on the Denver Broncos has been incredibly difficult, but Pat Surtain is expected to miss at least 3 weeks with a pectoral strain, so this certainly does help the potential of someone like Nico Collins. But again, just wanted to reference these statistics. I will go ahead and talk about them later on in today's episode. Before we get into talking about my top 40 wide receivers, a quick reminder for those of you guys who want my all-encompassing rankings every single Sunday morning of this season, whether it is at the running back, wide receiver, quarterback, tight end, kicker, defense, and flex positions for a half PPR scoring format. Be sure to travel down to the description today and check out Betr. I'll be partnering with them for the entirety of the season, not only to provide rankings, but of course plays every single day. Yesterday we talked about Zubac and the automatic of him getting those rebounds. He was definitely able to deliver. So for those of you guys who are looking to get those rankings, sign up today using code Andrew, make that first time deposit minimum of 10, and of course make a first time play within a real cash play, picking more or less on 2-player statistics, and you'll be eligible to get those emails sent every single Sunday from mine directly to yours. Check out the map to the right side of the screen to determine your eligibility, and new users who sign up today using code Andrew get a free $10, so take advantage of the opportunity. Thank you very much. All right, let's go ahead and begin with my top 40 wide receiver rankings, beginning with our number 1, Puka Nacua. Thus far this season, Puka Nacua, when healthy, weeks 1 through 5, is averaging 21.6 fantasy points per game, which makes him number 1 amongst all wide receivers when healthy. And the reason why he's been able to achieve that level of success is because of the insane volume of opportunity he continues to get on a weekly basis, averaging 12.4 targets per game. That's only going to continue going into this upcoming week's matchup, taking on the Saints, as they are 14.5-point favorites, with Tyler Shough taking over the Saints starting quarterback position. Anticipate a one-sided affair, and anticipate for Puka Nacua to find a lot of success within the slot receiving role. Thus far this season, 40% of his receptions and receiving yards come from the slot position. Alontae Taylor, the primary nickel cornerback for the Saints, has given up the 8th most receptions, 6th most receiving yards, and 2nd most receiving touchdowns to opposing slot receiving options. Expect for a lot of success for our number 1 wide receiver, Puka Nacua. Number 2, we have Ja'Marr Chase. Look, since Joe Flacco has taken over, Ja'Marr Chase has stepped into a completely different realm of success. I mean, just the last 3 games with Joe Flacco, we're talking about 54 targets, which is the most in a 3-game span since 1992. He tied the record for the most receptions in a 3-game span with 38, tying Michael Thomas's overall record. Again, as we approach the remainder of the season, as long as Joe Flacco and Ja'Marr Chase are healthy, we're in a perfect position to succeed. But unfortunately, Joe Flacco is dealing with a throwing arm shoulder injury, and if that strain is going to hold him out for a week, and of course we're going to have the backup quarterback Jake Browning come back in, we saw Jake Browning and Ja'Marr Chase still be relevant at a top-tier capacity against the Detroit Lions a month ago. So there's still a possibility taking on the Chicago Bears in which Ja'Marr Chase is going to be elite regardless who plays quarterback this week for the Bengals. Number 3, we have Jaxon Smith-Njigba. Speaking of elite wide receiver play, the last 3 games in which Jaxon Smith played prior to their bye week, he was at a completely different level. We're talking about base minimums of 8 receptions, 123 yards, 1 touchdown, and a base minimum within those 3 games of 22.3 fantasy points and a half PPR scoring format. Despite the fact that he just had a bye week, he is still number 1 amongst all wide receivers in the National Football League in terms of total receiving yards and air yards. Again, receiving yards thus far this season, 819. He has almost 100 more than the next wide receiver. Again, the Commanders matchup this week is an advantageous one. They're allowing the 8th most fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. Rashee Rice just came away with 9 catches, 93 and a touchdown. CeeDee Lamb the week prior, 5 for 110 and a touchdown. McConkey dominating. Drake London, 8 for 110 and a touchdown. Expect for his 8 catches over 100 yards and a touchdown this week. Number 4, speaking of Rashee Rice taking on that Commanders defense on Monday night and, of course, dominating with 9 targets, 9 catches, 93 and a touchdown. This is an offense that is really taking their steps forward and continuing to dominate. I mean, this is the best that Patrick Mahomes has looked, not only for fantasy purposes, but in terms of an offensive threat in many of years. And now you get back Rashee Rice, who looks like he hasn't lost a step. If anything, he has gained a step since the ACL injury. Since his return in the last 2 weeks, he has the second most receptions and most receiving touchdowns amongst all wide receivers throughout that span of time, and now has an opportunity of taking on the Buffalo Bills. This game is expected to be the second highest scoring game of the weekend. 52.5 point total taken on the Buffalo Bills every time they take each other on. It is implicated shootouts as they are both high-powered offenses. Considering the Chiefs' offense has scored 4 touchdowns minimum for 5 straight games, expect for a lot more touchdown opportunity to continue to go in the direction of Rashee Rice, who has quickly become their number 1 red zone threat. Number 5, to begin the A tier, we have Amon-Ra St. Brown, who is coming off of 11 straight games, whether it's regular or postseason, of 6 or more receptions. Again, the opportunity that continues to go in his direction has been steady, and as long as the Vikings are able to keep this game somewhat competitive this week, and of course allow Amon-Ra St. Brown to get those second half opportunities instead of running the ball heavily, we should see a lot of success. The last time out against this defense, we did see Amon-Ra St. Brown pretty much take a back seat to Jahmyr Gibbs in the rushing threat, in which he had a 4 rushing touchdown game. But the other 3 games against the Minnesota Vikings in just the last 2 seasons, he has scored 21 or more fantasy points against them 3 of those 4 games. So if we're anticipating a potential game in which St. Brown is going to continue to dominate against his secondary, I would anticipate him to do so at a manner in which he scores touchdowns, he finds himself that 6+ reception base minimum. Again, right now, amongst all wide receivers in the league, he's number 1 in terms of total receiving touchdowns, so expect a lot of success this week. Number 6, we have CeeDee Lamb. Look, he had a tough matchup this most recent week taking on the Denver Broncos. Besides allowing the fewest fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers, that Patrick Surtain coverage is definitely difficult. Now, we're anticipating a bounce back here against the Arizona Cardinals, which is implicated to being the highest scoring game of the upcoming week on Monday Night Football, a 53.5 point total. That's the second highest that I have seen all season long, primarily because, of course, the Dallas Cowboys secondary has not been able to stop a soul. And as long as that is going to continue to be the case, we would anticipate for CeeDee Lamb to ball out. I mean, again, this most recent week, 7 catches on 10 targets, 74 yards. For many other wide receivers, we'd be jumping up and down and celebrating, but for the likes of CeeDee Lamb, that's an underwhelming performance, especially when you take into account in 6 of the last 7 games, he's either had 100 base total yards or 1 touchdown accompanying his performance. So if we're anticipating maybe both of those 2 occur this week in a shootout, he's definitely an A, if not S tier, if I could fit all these guys into that one singular row. Our number 7 is Justin Jefferson. Look, we are all anticipating now that Carson Wentz is out for the remainder of the season for J.J. McCarthy to return. Obviously, he's missed a considerable amount of time, but in the last 5 quarters that Justin Jefferson has played with J.J. McCarthy, he's had 10 targets, 6 catches, 121 and a touchdown for 21.1 fantasy points. Again, the opportunity for him getting targets should be an automatic regardless of who's playing quarterback. If Carson Wentz can target Justin Jefferson 10 plus times for 4 consecutive games, I would anticipate J.J. McCarthy to elevate him to that range, especially when you're taking on the Detroit Lions secondary this week, the 5th best matchup at the wide receiver position, allowing over 30.5 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. We've recently seen Jamar Chase, T. Higgins both score against this defense. Hollywood Brown, 45 and 2 touchdowns. Tez Johnson, 58 and a touchdown. Anticipate a lot of success here from JJ. Ladd McConkey is our number 8 going into this week because of multiple factors. First and foremost, the last 4 games, 41 targets. He's back to being the clear and away number 1 receiving option of this Los Angeles Chargers offense. And because of the opportunities that he is getting, he's getting a lot of those opportunities, especially down near the goal line, in which he has scored 1 touchdown in 3 of the last 4 games. We know they take on the Tennessee Titans, who are the 11th best matchup, and just gave up 13 catches, 203 and 2 touchdowns to Indianapolis, 17 for 190 and a touchdown to the New England Patriots. But Roger McCreary, their primary nickel cornerback, had just been traded to the Rams yesterday. So if their primary nickel starting cornerback is going to be out, anticipate for Ladd McConkey to dice up this defense at an even higher potential rate. Number 9, we have Michael Pittman Jr., the thumbnail of today's episode, who is coming off of, again, 6 touchdowns in the last 8 games. The fact that he's able to put together so many performances accompanied by a touchdown is ridiculous. In this most recent week, that receiving touchdown was one of the craziest catches I have ever seen. And even prior to that game, he had a catch over the middle of the field where he tipped the ball up 3 yards over his head and then made the catch anyway. He is absolutely balling out in an offense that is dominating and has an opportunity of taking on the Steelers, who are the 4th best matchup at the position. Ja'Marr Chase recently, 16 catches, 161. T. Higgins, 6 for 96 and a touchdown. JJ, 126. Jordan Addison, 4 catches for 114. Many of wide receivers finding success, so why not Michael Pittman Jr., who has been on fire thus far this season. Number 10, we have Jaylen Waddle taking on the Baltimore Ravens Thursday Night Football. Since Tyreek Hill has gotten injured, the following fantasy points have been contributed by Jaylen Waddle: 20.0, 12.8, and 18.4.5 PPR scoring format, and that's excluding the Cleveland Browns game in which there was heavy weather implications. Now that we have the Baltimore Ravens matchup at home in Miami, I am anticipating him to be able to take advantage of the 2nd best matchup at the position that recently just allowed 114 yards and 7 catches by Romeo Doubs. The Houston Texans receivers, 17 catches, 179, 3 touchdowns. Kansas City receivers, 13 for 168, 3 touchdowns. Amon-Ra, 7 for 77 and a touchdown. With Lamar's return, this could lead to an even greater negative game script on the side of the Miami Dolphins, leading to even that much more target opportunity for Jaylen Waddle. And considering Darren Waller is out, there's even more opportunity for potential targets going in his direction. Number 11, we have Davante Adams, who amongst all players thus far this season is number 1 in terms of red zone targets, and he's number 2 in terms of total receiving touchdowns in the red zone with 5 total. The fact of the matter is the Rams are number 1 amongst all teams thus far this season in terms of red zone passing touchdowns with 14 total. And as long as Matthew Stafford continues to dish the rock in his direction down near the red zone and continues to ignore the potential of handing the ball off to Kyren Williams, of course, that's all McVay's call. The fact of the matter is they have an opportunity this week to completely blow out the Saints and have many opportunities to score. With Tyler Shuck playing quarterback for the Saints, they are 14.5-point favorites. I anticipate a blowout, but also a lot of target opportunity near the red zone for Davante Adams. Hopefully he comes away with 1 touchdown minimum this week. Number 12, we have Romeo Doubs, who, like I mentioned just moments ago, is coming off of 10 targets, 7 catches, 114 in a game in which they were forced to throw the ball. In comparison to prior weeks, we saw, of course, an improvement in terms of the overall passing completion percentage of Caleb Williams, but also 10 additional passing attempts in comparison to the 2 prior games in which they weren't forced to throw the ball. They were just very easily able to run the rock behind DeAndre Swift and Kyle Monangai, and my only concern this week is that that could occur once again as they take on the Cincinnati Bengals. We know that the Bengals are a top 3 matchup at the running back position, and if in fact they're able to continue to impose their will by running the football, it may lead to less target opportunity in the direction of Romeo Doubs. We may go back to getting 6 targets in the absence of a touchdown. It may lead to less potential for upside. That's my only primary concern, but we're hoping that Caleb Williams will continue to deliver the ball in the direction of Romeo Doubs, considering DJ Moore's dealing with a bit of an injury, and additionally on top of that, we have Luther Burden probably out due to the concussion protocol this week. Number 13, we have Nico Collins. Look, he's expected to clear concussion protocol in the coming days. In the event in which he doesn't, I would be incredibly surprised, and we would effectively move up other Texans wide receivers within my all-encompassing rankings via Betr and or Patreon. But in regards to the potential of him this week, we have to remember that last time out, prior to the concussion, he had 10 targets against the Seattle Seahawks secondary. Opportunity was going in his direction at a healthy rate, and I anticipate that to continue, especially considering Patrick Surtain, the primary number 1 cornerback of the Denver Broncos, the reigning defensive player of the year, is expected to miss this week with a pectoral strain. With Nico Collins in this offense having to find success through the air somehow, some way, I'm expecting a lot of opportunities to go in his direction, and taking on Riley Moss as the number 2 corner, as their now primary number 1, there should be a lot of advantages in the form of Nico Collins finding fantasy success. Number 14, we have Drake London. Now, I'm not 100% certain as to whether he is going to play or Michael Penix. Obviously, Drake London missed his most recent Sunday's performance against the Miami Dolphins, in which he was greatly missed because of a hip injury. And if in fact he's going to miss once again, then we will reevaluate the overall conversation of what else we can look towards in terms of this Atlanta Falcons offense, probably looking primarily towards Kyle Pitts getting the uptick of opportunity against the New England Patriots. Because whoever is going to be the number 1 wide receiver for the Falcons is going to have to take on Christian Gonzalez. And that coverage has has already been difficult for many of wide receivers thus far this season. We know that Drake London, when he is with Michael Penix, has seen many of opportunities and can be a stud in any given matchup. So as long as he is healthy and Michael Penix is under center, and we're not going to have Kirk Cousins there, we're easily firing him up in a top 15 capacity this week. Number 15, we have Marvin Harrison Jr. The absence of Kyler Murray has certainly made a difference. If anything, things got worse when, Jacoby Brissett came in. In the last 2 games with Kyle Murray, we had seen Marvin Harrison produce 15.6 and 11.8 fantasy points and a half PPR. And hopefully with Kyler back and Marvin Harrison ready to come off the bye week here, he is in a position taking on the Dallas Cowboys, the number 1 matchup, nearly allowing 34.5 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers to ball out in a game which is implicated of being the highest scoring game of the week. Denver wide receivers had 196 and 3 touchdowns on Sunday. Tetairoa McMillan, 2 touchdowns. Garrett Wilson, 71 and a touchdown. Romeo Doubs, 58 and 3 touchdowns. Why not Marvin Harrison this week to ball out against a secondary that cannot stop opposing wide receivers? Number 16, we have DK Metcalf. Look, he has had himself 1 receiving touchdown minimum in 5 of the last 6 games. And as long as that consistency of opportunity is going to go in his direction, anticipate him to take advantage of the 3rd best matchup at the wide receiver position, the Indianapolis Colts, allowing 31.29 fantasy points per game. And the reason why we are anticipating him to take advantage of it is because of all the injuries this secondary has accrued over the course of the last couple weeks, and the fact that the Indianapolis Colts are going to impose their will on Pittsburgh's defense, whether on the ground or through the air, which is going to create a negative game script, going to force Aaron Rodgers to throw the ball heavily. And when he is looking in the direction of DK Metcalf on the outside, expect for a lot of big plays down the field and especially near the red zone, which has been the case on a consistent rate as of late. Moving on to our number 17, we have George Pickens. I honestly think that number 17, now that I'm looking at the screen once again, I put these graphics together and I'm thinking to myself, maybe George Pickens at 17 is a little bit too low. Because if he comes away with a touchdown this week, he easily becomes a top 12 player. Because the last 2 weeks, he has had 4 catches for 82 and 7 catches for 78. And in the event in which in this most recent week against Patrick Surtain, he catches that touchdown instead of an incomplete pass, we end up having an 18-plus point performance, and he's easily a top 12 prospect within that given week. So I think there's a possibility going up against the Arizona Cardinals with a 53.5 point implicated total. I understand the coverage of Will Johnson can certainly lock him up at times, but even in this most recent week was able to find himself 4 targets and 3 receptions against Patrick Surtain, the best cover corner in the National Football League. I still think that even with Lamb, Ferguson, Javonte Williams pulling away opportunities from George Pickens, he has seen enough as of late, and going into a shootout should very easily, assuming he scores a touchdown, be top 12, but 17 is incredibly safe. Number 18, we have Zay Flowers. From weeks 1 through 4 with Lamar Jackson, 7 catches for 143 and a touchdown, 7 catches for 75, 7 catches for 74. This most recent performance with Tyler Huntley, 9 targets, 7 catches, 63 is the closest that we have gotten to the range in which Lamar Jackson was able to elevate Flowers earlier on this year. We all know that Lamar Jackson is expected to return on Thursday night against the Miami Dolphins. So considering he is here to elevate his number 1 receiving option, my only concern ends up being if in fact this, Baltimore Ravens offense comes in there and dominates early and is able to run the ball, and they are forcing the opposing team to have to throw late and they are running out the clock in the second half, could that lead to less opportunities for Zay Flowers? Even if that is potentially the case, I would anticipate the number 1 receiving option of this offense to still get his opportunity of workload to be in that 6-7 reception range, which in my mind keeps him solid within the D tier. Number 19, we have Deebo Samuel. Now, there's been a lot of information revealed by the Washington Commanders organization this morning. First and foremost, Terry McLaurin already designated out. Now, that first and foremost elevates Deebo Samuel regardless of who's playing quarterback. And when I say regardless of who's playing quarterback, I know that Jayden Daniels is expected to practice today, but we don't know if he's going to be available for Sunday against the Seattle Seahawks. So whether it is Jayden Daniels or Marcus Mariota, expect for a lot of opportunity and success. I mean, again, thus far this season with Jayden Daniels, in the last 4 games, he has put up 19.1, 13.9, 19.6, and 3.4 fantasy points. Majority of the time dominating, finding the end zone, and getting himself a healthy reception count. Therefore, when you're taking on the Seahawks, who are an elite run-stop defense, and it's going to force this Washington Commanders offense to throw the ball for majority of the game, with Terry McLaurin out, expect for Deebo Samuel at base minimum to be a top 20 prospect. Our number 20, we have Wan'Dale Robinson, who is number 1 amongst all wide receivers thus far this season in terms of targets from the slot position. And as long as those opportunities continue to go in his direction, he'll have an opportunity this week taking on the 49ers, taking on Upton Stout, their primary nickel cornerback, who has given up the 4th most receptions and 5th most receiving yards to opposing slot receiving options. This most recent week, they gave up 11 receptions, 99 yards, and 2 touchdowns to opposing slot receivers. That's the 49ers defense against Houston. We're anticipating this 49ers defense, which is the 12th best matchup at the wide receiver position, to be taken advantage of. If this is a negative game script, that means even more opportunity for Wan'Dale Robinson. But with Scadaboo out for the remainder of the season, I think this is going to be less rushing attempts from the Giants going forward and more opportunities in the direction of Wan'Dale Robinson and Darius Slayton. Number 21, we have T. Higgins, who over the course of the last 3 games, yes, he's only gotten 20 targets, which honestly is a solid number. But when you compare it to Jamar Chase's 54 targets, we're thinking, hey, come on, Flacco, give us a couple more opportunities. Yes, he was able to save his week with a reception for a 44-yard touchdown last week, but he only had 2 targets and was saved because of that one singular play. Luckily, he's been able to score a touchdown in 3 of the last 4 games, which has certainly saved his overall score lines. But going into this week, regardless of who's playing quarterback, whether it is Flacco or Browning, I would anticipate T. Higgins to be heavily involved, primarily because the Bengals defense forces them to. The Bengals defense has allowed the following points this season: 39, 31, 27, 37, 28, 48, 27. The scripts are negative all the time. So this week, anticipate a lot of passing, like every single week, from the Cincinnati Bengals, who are taking on the Bears, who just allowed 98 and 2 touchdowns to Olave. I mean, we're talking about Moore and McCaffrey going for 79 and 2 touchdowns combined, Pickens 68 and a touchdown. I'd anticipate T. Higgins, hopefully, for a touchdown this week with a couple extra sprinkled yards in there. Number 22, we have Brian Thomas Jr. coming off of the bye week. I'm hoping for a post-bye week uptick of production, but also just more opportunity in his direction. We were progressing in the right way most recently prior to that Rams game, but that Rams game was a complete, decleater. For a lack of a better term. The overall snap share of Brian Thomas Jr. dipping to 66%. Travis Hunter getting 14 targets. It certainly wasn't the prettiest overall sight to see for those of us who had him in our lineup. But now he has an opportunity to bounce back for the remainder of the season, taking on the Raiders, the 9th best matchup at the position, who just most recently, prior to the bye week, allowed Quentin Johnston, 71 in a touchdown. Odunze, 69 in a touchdown. Michael Pittman Jr., 39 in a touchdown. Rashee Rice, 7 catches, 42 and 2 touchdowns. I understand that Brian Thomas Jr. has really, as of thus far this season, lately become a big play or touchdown kind of dependent player, but that's kind of what he was all of late last season. But he was making those plays on a consistent basis, big plays down the field, scoring touchdowns. If we can get those at a more consistent rate, he'll be able to increase within these rankings as we proceed this season. Number 23, we have Courtland Sutton, who dropped a touchdown and completely sold my more on 4.5 receptions play this most recent week via Betr. But we are anticipating him to be able to bounce back. He had accomplished more than 4.5 receptions, so 5 or more receptions in 15 of the last 18 games. Now we're at 15 of the last 19, which still is an incredibly successful rate, but now has to take on the Houston Texans. Stingley and Lassiter's coverage is no joke, and even though we have seen other wide receivers such as Jaxon Smith-Njigba recently find success against the Texans, it's very few and far between. So I am anticipating Courtland Sutton to be at a far lesser potential for upside this given week because of the matchup, and because of this, I think he is safe as a low-end wide receiver too, because at any given week, he can make a potential play down the field in one-on-one coverage, make himself a 50-50 ball, turn it to a touchdown. There's always the possibility that, which we're hoping, is going to take place this week. Number 24, we have Tetairoa McMillan. Are we surprised that he's coming away with a career high 7 receptions in this most recent week with Andy Dalton? We shouldn't be surprised. The opportunity is always there with the gunslinging quarterback, but this week we are anticipating for Bryce Young to be able to return and be available, taking on the Packers, who are the 7th best matchup at the position. They're giving up 27 fantasy points per game. They gave up 5 catches, 55 and a touchdown to DK Metcalf, 4 for 74 and a touchdown to Roman Wilson, both in the same game. Jamar Chase, 94 and a touchdown. George Pickens, 134 and 2 touchdowns. This is going to be a game in which, in a negative game script, it'll force, Tetairoa McMillan to get himself opportunities against an elite run-stopping defense. This is all in the direction of Tetairoa finding himself far more fantasy success, hopefully finding himself in the end zone and not having to rely upon a high target count, because typically it has not been, the greatest overall opportunities going his direction with Bryce Young under center. 25, we have Chris Olave. The fact of the matter is Tyler Shough taking the starting quarterback role leads this Saints team to being a 14.5 point underdog, taking on the LA Rams. Now, in this most recent game in the second half, we did see Tyler Shough target Chris Olave 6 times in the second half for 4 receptions. And that's a solid overall base. And if we can get that in 2 halves of football, 12 plus targets consistently in a negative game script, then we're going to find success, especially taking on the Rams defense that has an elite run stop effort. Therefore, if we're anticipating for wide receivers to find success in a negative script, I mean, we've recently seen Travis Hunter come away with 8 catches, 101 and a touchdown against the Rams. Kendrick Bourne, 10 for 142. Michael Pittman, 41 and a touchdown. AJ Brown, 6 for 109 and a touchdown. You can find success against the secondary, and that's where I'm anticipating Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed to live at this week. Jordan Addison is our number 26. He's been the number 9 wide receiver in terms of fantasy points per game on average since returning. He's put up 10 plus fantasy points in 4 straight games, and this most recent week with a quarterback that quite literally only had one functioning arm. Now, look, he's been able to rank within the top 31 of the wide receiver position for all of these games and a half PPR, and now has an opportunity of taking on the 5th best matchup at the wide receiver position, the Detroit Lions secondary, allowing over 30.5 fantasy points per game. But my primary concern, and the reason why I have him at number 26, is because of J.J. McCarthy. The question is, can J.J. McCarthy jump into this offense and elevate them, or at least keep them steady to the kind of production and opportunity share that has been going in the direction of Jordan Addison for the last month of the season. Number 27, we have Stefon Diggs, who over the course of the last 5 games has had 4 really solid producing weeks: 13.1, 19.6, 10.4, 8.9. This most recent week, relatively underwhelming with only 3 catches for 14, but was able to score a touchdown to bail himself out. I think Drake May really is spreading the love just as much as Jordan is thus far this season, and as long as he continues to favor guys like Demario Douglas, Kayshon Boutte, Hunter Henry, and a plethora of threats, it's going to make Stefon Diggs a lesser potential option on a weekly basis. And even though you are taking on the Atlanta Falcons this week, who most recently just allowed 99 yards and a touchdown to Waddle and 36 and a touchdown to Malik Washington, of course, this Falcons defense struggling to stop anything this most recent week against Tua Tagovailoa, I would assume that another one of these AFC East teams can go in there and absolutely smack the Atlanta Falcons. And if that ends up taking place, it's obviously in favor of Stefon Diggs' fantasy point production. Number 28, we have Rashid Shaheed, who's coming off of 12 targets, 9 catches, 75 yards. With Tyler Shough expected to be the starting quarterback going into Sunday against the Rams, 14.5-point underdogs, we have to remember that in this most recent game in the second half of the game, Tyler Shough targeted Rashid Shaheed 8 times that led to 7 catches and 53 receiving yards. If this Rams defense is going to continue their efforts as an elite run-stopping unit, I would anticipate a lot of passing attempts in the direction of Rashid Shaheed and Chris Olave. Of course, we've recently seen Travis Hunter 101 and a touchdown, Kendrick Bourne 10 catches for 142, Michael Pittman Jr. 54 and a touchdown, AJ Brown 109 and a touchdown. Devontae Smith also dominated against that defense. Everyone has found success because they've had to throw the ball against the Rams in negative scripts. Hopefully, Tyler Shough can continue his streak of success here. Moving on to our number 29, we have Travis Hunter. I just mentioned him just moments ago, coming off of his most recent game of 8 catches on 14 targets, 101 yards and a receiving touchdown against the LA Rams. But now this week has an opportunity of taking on the 9th best matchup at the wide receiver position, the Raiders, who have given up a plethora of fantasy points to Odunze, Rice, Michael Pittman Jr., Quentin Johnston. It doesn't matter. The most recent 2 games that Travis Hunter has played, he has had himself career-high offensive snap share. And as long as the overall opportunities of running routes is going to continue, his target opportunity is only going to grow and make him that much more relevant in a fantasy capacity. Therefore, I have him at a top 30 position here going into this week. I anticipate the running game for the Jacksonville Jaguars to be where they lean upon. And when that opens up the play action, expect for Travis Hunter, BTJ to both find success deep down the field. Number 30, we have Khalil Shakir, who is still the number 1 receiving option of this offense. And this most recent week was lucky enough to take a quick 8-yard hitch, turn around, make 2 defenders miss, and run 48 yards for a touchdown. And we love to see it, but the fact of the matter is, outside of those touchdown performances, he's pretty much going to be 4 or 5 catches for 45 to 55 receiving yards. But luckily this week, they do take on the Kansas City Chiefs. This is implicated to be a shootout, the second highest scoring game of the week with a 52.5-point total taking on this defense. Therefore, if we get put into a position in which Khalil Shakir has to catch the ball 7-8 times this week, expect for that much more upside. And if he scores a touchdown like he has had multiple times over the course of the last 5 weeks here, he's in an even better position. Number 31, we have Keenan Allen. Look, the fact of the matter is there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen of the Los Angeles Chargers offense, with Gadsden kind of stepping forward into the role which he has, with McConkey dominating at the point of attack with 10 targets per week thus far this season over the course of the last 4 weeks. we have a lot of opportunities for Keenan Allen to still make plays, and he's gotten himself 4+ receptions every single game this season, but it doesn't mean that he has to be their go-to. But this week, they take on the Tennessee Titans. And thus far this season, the Tennessee Titans have struggled on the ground, through the air, doesn't matter where. They are the 11th best wide receiver matchup, and they just most recently traded away their primary nickel cornerback to the Rams. Amongst all of the Chargers receivers, Keenan Allen only has 2 less receptions from the slot position in comparison to McConkey. So there's a possibility here, down near the red zone, without as much depth in their secondary, Tennessee could be in trouble with Keenan Allen on the way. Number 32, we have Xavier Worthy. In 2024 against the Buffalo Bills, regular and postseason, he put up 14.8 and 19.1 fantasy points. But obviously that was in the absence of Rashee Rice, who has clear and away become their primary red zone threat. Now, this all being said, the Chiefs offense has still scored 4 touchdowns minimum in each of the last 5 games. So if we're anticipating this game to be a shootout, and if we're anticipating for, of course, this Kansas City Chiefs offense to score 4 touchdowns this week, 1 to Rashee Rice, 1 to potentially a running back, 1 to potentially Travis Kelce, and then you would assume it's either Xavier Worthy or the potential of a Hollywood Brown touchdown to be able to gather the final touchdown that is available. Again, he is still the number 2 wide receiver option in this offense in terms of snaps, in terms of targets, and eventually those touchdowns are going to rack up, especially within an upcoming performance here in a shootout against the Buffalo Bills secondary. Romeo Doubs is our number 33. He's still the number 1 wide receiver of this Packers offense, despite the inclusion of Christian Watson and the immediate success he was able to find against the Steelers. But taking on the Panthers this week, who are exclusively playing zone coverage more than just about any team in the National Football League outside of the Dallas Cowboys, we have seen thus far this season that Romeo Doubs for Jordan Love has been his primary zone beater. Outside of Josh Jacobs, who has got himself 16 receptions in zone coverage, primarily because he's the primary checkdown when nothing is available there, we have seen Romeo Doubs be the primary number 1 in terms of receptions against zone coverage. So I'd anticipate Watson and Golden to pull coverage and allow for Romeo Doubs to find himself open alongside of Tucker Kraft for a majority of this game against the Carolina Panthers. Quentin Johnston is our number 34. I am not giving up. Look, just in the same way in which we didn't give up on McConkey, who went missing for the first month of the season, while Quentin Johnston was running absolutely rampant upon opposing teams, McConkey was eventually found, and I anticipate Quentin Johnston to be found this week taking on Tennessee. He's a very similar player to Jameson Williams last season, in which he's dependent on that touchdown or that big receiving play, but he's thus far this season gotten himself so many targets early on that he wasn't dependent on those plays because it was consistently going in his direction. When you have an opportunity of taking on the 11th best matchup, yes, there's a lot of cooks in this kitchen, but I would still anticipate for Quentin Johnston to be relevant within the upcoming matchup. Number 35 is Kayshon Boutte. He's the number 18 overall wide receiver in fantasy. I mean, he is this season's version of Rashad Bateman. Incredibly touchdown dependent. He has scored 4 receiving touchdowns in his last 10 receptions, but the fact of the matter is he continues to get it done, considering just how high-powered this offense has truly become thus far this season. Don't care about the matchup. You fire him up just for the potential of his upside. Number 36 is Troy Franklin. Again, over the course of the last 2 games, 18 total targets. And considering Courtland Sutton and Marvin Mims will be dealing with the primary coverage of Stingley and Lassiter, we would anticipate for Troy Franklin to get himself a lot of utilization within the screen game. But the primary nickel cornerback of the Houston Texans is no joke either. That's Jalen Petrie, who moves down from the safety position to play nickel. And that has been a problem for many of wide receivers against this defense. Therefore, Troy Franklin, yes, sits here as our number 36 in the given matchup. Moving on to our number 37, we have Chimere Dike, who is coming off of a week in which he had 21% of the overall target share, and in the absence of Calvin Ridley, has claimed the number 1 receiving option of this offense, taken on the 10th best matchup against the Chargers, 27.84 fantasy points per game. The Chargers have recently allowed Addison and Justin Jefferson to combine for 10 catches, 100 and a touchdown. Michael Pittman Jr. and Alec Pierce, 12 for 156 and a touchdown. Waddle and Malik Washington, 10 for 117. Expect for a lot of success, especially considering the Chargers defense has allowed 3 receiving touchdowns to opposing slot receiving options in just the last 2 games here. Moving on to our number 38, Jameson Williams. The fact of the matter is we have to be incredibly hopeful that they're going to elevate his overall usage in the post-bye apocalypse kind of era of this offense. As we proceed, we're hoping for more opportunity. We're hoping for big plays. We're hoping for touchdowns, but we're primarily hoping for 7+ targets weekly as we proceed. Number 39 is Tre Tucker. I don't know if Jacoby Myers is going to play. Wouldn't surprise me if he didn't. With Brock Bowers probably returning at a full capacity, could impact his overall target opportunity, but they are taking on the Jaguars, the 6th best matchup at the position. So in a negative game script, I would anticipate a lot of target opportunity in the direction of Tre Tucker to take advantage of the matchup on hand. The final wide receiver I wanted to mention is Jauan Jennings. I don't know the status of Brock Purdy or Ricky Pearsall, considering that is unknown. We still have Jauan Jennings, who is leading this team in terms of wide receivers, in terms of targets, air yards his most recent week, and has gotten himself back to claiming that position. As long as Ricky Pearsall and Purdy are out, Jauan Jennings, a solid top 40 option for those of you who are in desperate need of a wide receiver. That's going to cover for me today. The final thing I wanted to mention before we close out today's episode, for those of you who want my all-encompassing rankings every Thursday and Sunday, and of course want to ask me individualized questions, whether it is waiver wire pickup, trade questions, starter sit questions, be sure to check out the Patreon. You can support there. Down in the description, there's a link. All the information provided below and via the Patreon. You can check that out. If that's something of interest, you can support the channel in that regard. Greatly appreciate all the support. I'll be back later tonight live streaming on the channel, tomorrow with the quarterback rankings. And until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.